In the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, life moved at a pace that seemed almost too slow for the modern world. The air smelled of fresh pine trees and wildflowers, and the streets were lined with cozy houses where neighbors knew each other by name. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids played outside until the streetlights flickered on. But beneath its peaceful surface, Willow Creek carried secrets buried deep, just like the soil in its quiet cemetery. Ethan Harper had grown up in this town, but his childhood wasn't filled with the same carefree joy as others. He carried something heavy inside him, something he couldn't quite put into words. It all started years ago when his little sister passed away under circumstances no one fully understood. She was only 7 years old then, full of laughter and curiosity, always asking questions about everything around her. Her name was Lily, and she had been the light of their family. When she died, it felt like that light went out forever. Losing Lily left a hole in Ethan's heart that never healed. Even now, as a grown man in his late 20s, he still visited her grave regularly. It was tucked away in a corner of the cemetery surrounded by tall oak trees and patches of wildflowers. Sitting there, staring at her headstone gave him some strange comfort. Maybe it was because being near her made him feel closer to the happier days before tragedy struck. Or maybe it was because he hoped, somewhere deep down, that she could hear him if he talked to her. But lately, those visits started feeling different. Something didn't sit right with Ethan. On several occasions, he noticed odd things when he arrived at the gravesite. Footprints in the dirt nearby, freshly turned, soil as though someone had been digging. At first, he brushed it off, thinking it might be animals or vandals messing around. But the more he saw these signs, the harder it became to ignore them. Who would bother coming here? And why? One evening, while sorting through old boxes in his attic, Ethan stumbled upon an old photograph. It showed Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor holding a small wooden box. Its edges were worn, and there was a faint carving on top, though he couldn't make out what it said. What caught his attention most was how tightly she held onto it, like it meant something important. He remembered seeing the box once or twice. When they were younger, but after Lily's passing, it vanished without a trace. No one ever mentioned it again. Looking at the picture stirred up memories Ethan thought he'd forgotten. He recalled how Lily used to drag him into the woods behind their house, claiming she'd found something amazing. Back then, he dismissed it as childish imagination. Kids often made up stories, didn't they? But looking at the photo now, he wondered if there was more to it. Could the box have held something significant? If so, why hadn't anyone talked about it after she was gone? The questions gnawed at him, refusing to let go. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan sat by the window, staring out at the darkened streets of Willow Creek. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to think about Lily's death. Not just the fact that she was gone, but how it happened. Everyone said it was an accident, a fall from the treehouse in their backyard. But even as a kid, Ethan had doubted that explanation. He remembered hearing hushed conversations between his parents, whispering about keeping certain details private. Why keep anything secret unless there was something to hide? As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, Ethan made a decision. Whatever was buried alongside Lily, or perhaps instead of her, he needed to find out. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Was someone trying to cover up what really happened? Did the box in the photo hold answers? Or worse, did it contain something dangerous? With determination settling in his chest, Ethan resolved to dig deeper, not just into the past, but into the very ground where Lily rested. Little did he know, uncovering the truth would take him places he never imagined and reveal secrets that would leave the entire town reeling. For now, though, all he could do was wait. Wait for the right moment, gather whatever scraps of information he could find, and prepare himself for whatever lay ahead. Because one thing was clear: if they only knew what was really buried in Lily's grave, it would change everything. For Ethan, for Willow Creek, and for everyone who thought they understood what happened all those years ago. Ethan's mind was a whirlwind of questions as he tried to piece together the fragments of his childhood. The photograph of Lily holding the mysterious wooden box kept replaying in his head, like a puzzle missing its final piece. He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed answers, and the only person who might have them was his mother. But reaching out to her wasn't going to be easy. His relationship with his mom had been strained for years. After Lily's death, she'd withdrawn from everyone, including Ethan. She moved away shortly after the funeral, saying she needed a fresh start, but it felt more like she was running from something, or someone. Ethan hadn't spoken to her much since then, and their conversations were always surface level, avoiding anything that might stir up old wounds. Still, he had no choice. If anyone knew what happened to the box or why Lily's death remained shrouded in mystery, it was her. He picked up the phone and dialed her number, his fingers trembling slightly. It rang several times before she finally answered, her voice hesitant and guarded. "Ethan, is everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom," he said, trying to sound casual despite the knot forming in his stomach. I wanted to talk about some stuff. About Lily." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her tone was sharp, almost defensive. "Why are you bringing this up now? You know how hard it is for me to think about her." "I get it, Mom," Ethan replied quickly, not wanting to lose her cooperation. "But there are things I don't understand, things I need to know. Did Lily ever mention finding something unusual when she was little? Like maybe a box or, I don't know, papers or something?" His mother sighed heavily, and for a moment Ethan thought she might hang up. Instead, she said, "Ethan, please don't do this. Some things are better left alone. Trust me." "That's just it, Mom. I can't trust anyone anymore, not even you. Something's not right here. Why won't you tell me what really happened?" The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, she muttered, "If I tell you anything, promise me you'll let it go afterward. Promise me you won't dig any deeper." Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to lie to her, but he also knew he couldn't make such a promise. "Okay," he said softly, hoping his tone would convince her. "I promise." She took a deep breath, then began speaking in a low, shaky voice. "Lily came home one day excited about something she'd found in the woods. She wouldn't say exactly what it was, only that it was important and she needed to keep it safe. Your father and I told her to forget about it, to throw it away. But she refused. She hid it somewhere and we never found out where. Then," her voice cracked and she paused to compose herself. "Then she died and we assumed whatever it was went with her." Ethan's heart sank. So the box had existed and Lily had gone to great lengths to protect it. But what could have been inside that made her so determined to guard it? And why? Did his parents act like it didn't matter? Before he could ask more, his mother cut him off. "That's all I know, Ethan. Please leave it alone. Digging up the past will only bring pain." With that, she ended the call, leaving him staring at the phone in frustration. Determined to uncover more, Ethan decided to visit the cemetery groundskeeper, an elderly man named Mr. Grayson. Everyone in Willow Creek knew him. He'd worked at the cemetery for decades and seemed to know every inch of the place. If anyone had noticed strange activity around Lily's grave, it would be him. Grayson lived in a small house just outside town, surrounded by overgrown bushes and wildflowers. When Ethan knocked on the door, the old man greeted him with a warm smile, though his eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. They sat down in his cozy living room, sipping tea while Ethan explained why he was there. "You're asking about your sister's grave?" Grayson asked, leaning back in his chair. "It's been many years since then, son. Are you sure you want to reopen old wounds?" "I have to," Ethan replied firmly. "Something doesn't add up. Can you tell me anything about the day she was buried? Or if anyone's been acting suspiciously around her grave recently?" Grayson rubbed his chin thoughtfully, his gaze drifting toward the window. "Well, now that you mention it, there were rumors back then. People whispered about how rushed the service felt, like they were trying to get it over with as quickly as possible. And your father, bless his soul, he insisted on sealing the casket immediately. No one got to see her body, which struck some folks as odd. Ethan frowned. That part of the story matched what he vaguely remembered, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down his spine. Why would his dad insist on keeping the casket closed? Was he trying to hide something? And then, Grayson continued, there was that man. A stranger showed up late one night not long after the burial. He was standing near your sister's grave looking nervous. I confronted him, asked what he was doing there. He claimed he'd lost a valuable heirloom nearby, but I didn't believe him. There was something off about him, like he was searching for something specific. A man? Ethan echoed, his pulse quickening. Did you recognize him? Did he give a name? Grayson shook his head. No, he didn't stick around long enough for introductions, just mumbled something about being sorry and hurried off. I haven't seen him since, but I've always wondered what he was really after. The pieces were starting to come together in Ethan's mind, though the picture they formed was blurry and unsettling. Whoever this man was, he clearly had an interest in Lily's grave, and possibly in whatever she'd hidden. But without more information, Ethan was stuck guessing. As he thanked Grayson and prepared to leave, the old man placed a hand on his shoulder. Be careful, son, he said gravely. Sometimes digging into the past uncovers truths that aren't meant to see the light of day. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed him. For the first time in years, he felt closer to understanding what happened to Lily and why her memory still haunted him. Whatever secrets lay buried beneath the soil, he was determined to unearth them, no matter the cost. Ethan's mind was racing as he left Mr. Grayson's house. Every word the old man had said echoed in his head, swirling around like storm clouds that refused to settle. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something big, something dangerous. The stranger near Lily's grave, the rushed burial, the sealed casket, it all pointed to one thing. Someone didn't want the truth about Lily's death to come out. But why? What could possibly be worth hiding? Determined to find answers, Ethan spent the next few days poring over every scrap of information he could get his hands on. He started with local newspaper archives, combing through dusty microfiche records at the town library. It wasn't glamorous work. His eyes ached from staring at the screen, and the air smelled faintly of mildew, but it felt important, like he was finally doing something for Lily after all these years. The articles about her death were sparse, most of them vague and dismissive. One headline read, "Tragic accident claims young life," while another simply stated, "Local, child dies in fall." There wasn't much detail beyond that, just a few lines about how she'd fallen from the treehouse in their backyard. But as Ethan flipped through the pages, he noticed something odd. One article mentioned unconfirmed reports of foul play but offered no further explanation. Another hinted at an investigation being cut short due to lack of evidence. Foul play, an investigation. No one had ever told Ethan any of this before. His parents had always insisted it was an accident, a tragic, senseless accident. Yet here was proof that others in town had suspected otherwise. Who were these unnamed sources, and what did they know that Ethan didn't? His search led him to a stack of older newspapers from the weeks leading up to Lily's death. At first glance, they seemed unrelated. Stories about town council meetings, property disputes, even a feature on the annual Harvest Festival. But then he stumbled across something that made his blood run cold. A small blurb buried in the back pages described a heated argument between two prominent townspeople over land ownership. One of them accused the other of forging documents to claim rights to a piece of property deep in the woods. The woods. That's where Lily used to drag him when she claimed she'd found something amazing. Could whatever she discovered have been connected to this dispute? It was a stretch, but Ethan couldn't ignore the timing. Whatever she'd stumbled upon must have been significant enough to rattle powerful people, and maybe even put her life in danger. By the time Ethan left the library, his head was spinning. He needed fresh air, so he decided to take a walk along the familiar paths behind his childhood home, the same ones he and Lily used to explore together. As he wandered deeper into the woods, memories flooded back to him. He remembered the way Lily's laughter would echo through the trees, how she'd race ahead of him, pointing out hidden treasures like animal tracks or wild mushrooms. She'd always been fearless, too curious for her own good sometimes. Back then, Ethan had teased her for it, calling her Detective Lily. Now, though, he wondered if her curiosity had led her somewhere she shouldn't have gone. He followed the trail until he reached the base of the treehouse. It was still there, weathered and leaning slightly to one side, but otherwise unchanged. Climbing up, he sat on the splintered wooden floor and looked out at the view. From here you could see the entire backyard stretching toward the woods. It was peaceful now, bathed in golden afternoon sunlight, but Ethan couldn't help picturing that night. The frantic shouts, the flashing lights of the ambulance, the unbearable silence that followed. As he sat there, lost in thought, he noticed something tucked beneath one of the boards. Reaching down, he pulled it free, a faded photograph. At first glance, it looked like any other family picture. Ethan and Lily smiling at the camera, arms slung around each other's shoulders. But on the back, written in Lily's childish scrawl, were the words, "Found it. Don't tell anyone." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What had she found? And why had she felt the need to keep it secret? He turned the photo over again, examining it closely. In the background, barely visible, was the outline of a wooden box sitting on the ground beside them, the same box from the attic photograph. Suddenly it hit him. Lily hadn't just stumbled upon something random in the woods. She'd taken it home, shown it to him, and then hidden it away, which meant it might still be out there somewhere. Back at his apartment, Ethan spread everything he'd gathered onto the kitchen table. The newspaper clippings, the photograph, notes scribbled in shorthand. He stared at them, trying to connect the dots. If Lily had found something incriminating, evidence of corruption, forgery, or worse, then whoever was involved would have wanted it gone. Maybe they'd pressured her to hand it over. Or maybe they'd silenced her instead. A knock at the door startled him out of his thoughts. Opening it, he found his neighbor standing there holding a cardboard box. "Hey, Ethan," the man said awkwardly. "I was cleaning out my garage and came across some of your mom's old stuff. Thought you might want it." Inside the box were more relics from Ethan's childhood, school projects, birthday cards, and a shoebox filled with letters and trinkets. Flipping through them, Ethan froze when he came across a folded piece of paper. It was a letter addressed to Lily, written in neat block letters. The return address was unfamiliar, but the content sent chills down his spine. "We know what you've taken. Bring it back and we'll forget this ever happened. If not..." The sentence ended abruptly, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Ethan's hands trembled as he read it over and over. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. Someone had known about Lily's discovery, and they weren't playing games. Whoever wrote this letter had likely been desperate enough to do anything, to protect their secrets. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was darker than he'd imagined. Lily hadn't died in a simple accident. She'd been caught in the crossfire of something much bigger than either of them could have understood. And now, decades later, those secrets were still buried, literally and figuratively. For the first time since starting this journey, Ethan felt afraid, not just for himself, but for what he might uncover. Digging into the past wasn't just about finding closure anymore. It was about confronting the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Because if he didn't, Lily's story would remain untold, her bravery forgotten. As dawn broke outside, his window, Ethan made a decision. He couldn't keep chasing shadows or piecing together fragments. If the answers were buried alongside Lily, then it was time to face them head on, even if it meant disturbing the peace of her final resting place. The decision to dig up his sister's grave weighed heavily on Ethan. It wasn't just the physical act of disturbing her final resting place that troubled him. It was the emotional toll it would take. For years, Lily's grave had been a sacred space, a quiet corner of the world where he could feel close to her. But now, standing at the edge of the cemetery under the cover of darkness, holding a shovel in trembling hands, Ethan felt like he was crossing a line he could never uncross. He had waited until midnight, when the town was asleep and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth. Every step toward her grave felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was resisting him. When he finally reached the headstone, he stopped for a moment, staring at the carved letters that spelled out her name. "I'm sorry, Lily," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I hope you'll understand why I have to do this." Taking a deep breath, Ethan plunged the shovel into the soil. The first strike echoed loudly in the stillness, making him flinch. He glanced around nervously, half expecting someone to appear and stop him. But the cemetery remained empty, save for the shadows cast by the moonlight filtering through the trees. With each scoop of dirt, his resolve hardened. This wasn't just about closure anymore. It was about justice. If there was even a chance that Lily's death had been more than an accident, he owed it to her to find out. As the hole grew deeper, Ethan's muscles burned from the effort, but he pushed through the exhaustion. His mind kept flashing back to memories of Lily, the way she used to giggle uncontrollably when they played hide and seek, the way she'd beg him to read her bedtime stories over and over again. She had been so full of life, so innocent, and yet someone or something had taken all of that away from her. Finally, after what felt like hours, the shovel struck something solid. Ethan froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Dropping to his knees, he brushed away the loose dirt with his hands, revealing the edge of a wooden crate. It wasn't a coffin, at least, not the kind he'd expected. This one was smaller, rougher, its surface marred by scratches and dents. His stomach churned as he pried it open, unsure of what he might find inside. At first glance, the contents seemed ordinary. A dusty wooden box, wrapped in yellowed cloth. Beside it lay a bundle of personal items, a faded hair ribbon, a cracked porcelain doll, and a folded piece of paper. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked up the note. Unfolding it carefully, he recognized Lily's handwriting immediately. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. "Dear Ethan, I'm sorry if I caused trouble. Please keep this safe. Love, Lily." His breath hitched as he clutched the note to his chest. Even in death, Lily was reaching out to him, trusting him, to protect whatever secret she'd left behind. Setting the note aside, Ethan turned his attention to the wooden box. It was heavier than it looked, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it slowly. Inside were stacks of documents, letters, photographs, and official-looking papers. Some of them were brittle with age, while others had been preserved surprisingly well. As Ethan flipped through them, his blood ran cold. The photographs showed prominent townspeople meeting in secret, their faces grim and tense. The letters detailed illegal activities, bribery, land fraud, embezzlement, all tied to powerful figures who had long controlled the fate of Willow Creek. It wasn't just corruption. It was systemic decay, rotting the town from within. And Lily, bright-eyed and curious, had stumbled upon evidence that could have brought the entire house of cards crashing down. No wonder someone had wanted to silence her. Ethan sat back on his heels, overwhelmed by the weight of what he'd uncovered. Each document was a thread in a web of lies that stretched far beyond anything he'd imagined. But amidst the shock and anger, he also felt a surge of pride. His little sister, barely 7 years old, had shown more courage than most adults ever would. She hadn't backed down, even when faced with danger. And now, it was up to him to finish what she'd started. Carefully, gathering the box and its contents, Ethan climbed out of the grave. The night air felt colder now, biting at his skin as he refilled the hole. He worked quickly, his movements mechanical, his mind racing with questions. Who had buried this crate instead of Lily? Had his parents known about it? Were they complicit? Or had they simply followed orders to protect themselves? By the time he smoothed the soil back into place, dawn was breaking on the horizon. The sky glowed faintly pink and orange, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Ethan knelt beside the headstone once more, placing a hand against the cold stone. "I'll make this right, Lily," he promised softly. "Whatever it takes." Back at his apartment, Ethan spread the documents across his kitchen table, organizing them into piles based on dates and names. As he pieced together the timeline, a clearer picture began to emerge. The corruption dated back decades, involving some of the wealthiest and most influential families in Willow Creek. They had manipulated land deals, stolen resources, and silenced anyone who dared to speak out. Lily's discovery must have been accidental, a child playing in the woods stumbling upon something she shouldn't have, but it had put her directly in their crosshairs. One name appeared repeatedly throughout the files: Thomas Alden. Ethan recognized the name instantly. Alden was a local businessman, a pillar of the community who had served on countless boards and committees. Everyone respected him, trusted him, yet according to the documents he was at the center of it all, orchestrating schemes that lined his pockets while ruining lives. Ethan's hands clenched into fists as he stared at Alden's smug face in one of the photographs. How many people had suffered because of this man? How many families had been torn apart by his greed? And worst of all, how many had turned a blind eye, choosing comfort over justice? But exposing the truth wouldn't be easy. These weren't ordinary criminals. They were untouchable, shielded by wealth and power. Going public meant risking everything: his safety, his reputation, maybe even his life. Still, Ethan knew he couldn't stay silent. Not after seeing what Lily had risked to protect these secrets. He spent the next few days compiling the evidence into a dossier, making copies of every document and photograph. Then, using a burner phone, he sent anonymous tips to journalists and law enforcement agencies outside Willow Creek. He included enough information to grab their attention, but held back the bulk of the evidence, keeping it safe until he could trust someone completely. As he hit send on the final message, a strange mix of relief and dread washed over him. The ball was rolling now, and there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, Ethan knew he'd done the right thing. For Lily, for Willow Creek, and for everyone who deserved the truth. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was yet to come. The days following Ethan's anonymous tip felt like living in a pressure cooker. He waited anxiously for something, anything, to happen, knowing that the information he'd sent out was explosive enough to shake Willow Creek to its core. But, as the hours ticked by without any immediate response, doubt began to creep in. Had he done enough? Would anyone believe him? Or worse, would they trace the documents back to him and silence him before he could say another word? Ethan tried to keep up appearances, going about his daily routine as if nothing had changed. He went to work, ran errands, and even forced himself to smile at neighbors who waved hello. Inside, though, he was a wreck. Every knock on the door made his heart race. Every phone call left him breathless with anticipation. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The weight of what he'd uncovered hung over him like a storm cloud, threatening to burst at any moment. And then it did. It started with a single article published online by an investigative journalist based in the city. The headline was bold and unflinching: "Secrets Beneath Willow Creek, Corruption Exposed." Ethan froze when he saw it, his hands trembling as he scrolled through the story. It was all there: the names, the dates, the photographs. Everything he'd sent had been pieced together into a damning exposé that named Alden and others as key players in decades of illegal activity. The article spread like wildfire, shared across social media platforms and picked up by major news outlets within hours. By midday, the entire town was buzzing. People gathered in coffee shops and grocery stores, whispering about the allegations. Some refused to believe it, clinging to their illusions of Willow Creek as a perfect little haven. Others were horrified but unsurprised, admitting they'd always suspected something wasn't right. And then there were those who seemed almost relieved, like the truth had finally caught up with them after years of denial. Ethan watched it all unfold from the sidelines, careful not to draw attention to himself. He wanted to feel triumphant, proud even, but instead he felt exposed. With every new detail splashed across headlines, he worried that someone might connect the dots back to him. After all, how many people knew about Lily's grave? How many had seen the old photograph of her holding the wooden box? His fears weren't unfounded. By the end of the week, threats started pouring in. At first, they came subtly. A message, scrawled on his car window telling him to mind his own business, or a rock thrown through his apartment window late at night. Then came the phone calls, anonymous voices growling warnings into his ear. One caller claimed to know where he lived and promised to make him regret ever opening his mouth. Another accused him of dragging innocent people through the mud for no reason. Ethan didn't need to be told twice he was in danger. He packed a bag with essentials and moved temporarily to a friend's cabin outside town, where he hoped to stay hidden until things calmed down. But even there, surrounded by dense woods and miles of isolation, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was being watched. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked suspicious. Meanwhile, the fallout in Willow Creek continued to escalate. Arrests were made swiftly, starting with Alden and several other high-profile figures implicated in the scandal. Their mugshots dominated local news broadcasts, shocking residents who had once admired them. Houses were raided, bank accounts frozen, and assets seized. For the first time in years, the town's elite were stripped of their power and their dignity. But justice didn't come easily. Many fought back, hiring expensive lawyers and launching smear campaigns to discredit the investigation. They claimed the evidence was fabricated, planted by jealous rivals or disgruntled former employees. Some even pointed fingers at Ethan indirectly, hinting that someone with a grudge against the town must have orchestrated the whole thing. None of them mentioned Lily by name, but Ethan knew exactly what they were implying, that she was collateral, damage in some larger scheme. The accusations stung, not because they were true, but because they twisted her memory into something ugly. Lily hadn't been part of anyone's agenda. She'd been a child, curious and brave, who stumbled upon something she shouldn't have. And now her legacy was being dragged through the mud alongside the people responsible for her death. Unable to sit idly by, Ethan decided to fight back. Using the remaining copies of the evidence, he reached out directly to independent journalists and activists known for tackling corruption cases. He provided them with irrefutable proof, handwritten notes, original photographs, and detailed accounts of everything he'd uncovered. This time he didn't hide behind anonymity. He signed his name to every communication, making it clear that he stood by the truth no matter the cost. "I'm not doing this for revenge," he wrote in one email. "I'm doing it for my sister, who deserved better than what she got. If exposing the truth means risking my life, then so be it." His boldness paid off. Within days, more stories broke, corroborating the initial report and adding layers of depth to the investigation. Witnesses came forward, sharing their own experiences of intimidation and exploitation at the hands of those now under scrutiny. Former employees revealed sordid details about cover-ups and bribes. Even lifelong residents admitted they'd turned a blind eye to wrongdoing, too afraid to speak up. For the first time, the people of Willow Creek began to confront their complicity. Conversations shifted from denial to accountability, from blame to reflection. Town meetings turned into heated debates about how such corruption had gone unchecked for so long and what needed to change moving forward. Amidst the chaos, Ethan found himself reflecting on his own journey. He thought about the countless nights spent digging through old records, the sleepless hours staring at photographs, the fear that had gnawed at him every step of the way. It had been exhausting, terrifying, and often lonely, but it had also been worth it. Because for the first time since Lily's death, he felt like he was honoring her memory in a meaningful way. One evening, as he sat alone in the cabin, staring out at the darkening sky, his phone buzzed. It was a text from someone unexpected, an old family friend who had moved away years ago. The message was short but heartfelt. "I heard about what you're doing. I just want you to know, your sister would be proud of you." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he read the words over and over again. Proud. That was all he'd ever wanted. To make Lily proud. And now, despite everything, he finally felt like he had. But the road ahead was still uncertain. The legal battles would drag on for months, maybe even years. Lives would be ruined, reputations shattered, and relationships tested. Willow Creek would never be the same again. Yet amidst the wreckage there was hope, a chance for renewal, for rebuilding, for creating a future where secrets couldn't fester unchecked. As Ethan set his phone aside and leaned back in his chair, he allowed himself a small smile. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. Lily's voice had finally been heard, and that more than anything was worth fighting for. Months had passed since the truth about Willow Creek came to light, and the town was still reeling from the aftershocks. The once idyllic streets now buzzed with a mix of tension and transformation. Some residents clung to their old ways, stubbornly, refusing to believe the accusations against people they'd trusted for years. Others embraced the change, determined to rebuild their community on a foundation of honesty and accountability. It was messy, painful, and far from perfect. But it was progress. Ethan Harper stood at the edge of the cemetery one crisp autumn morning, staring out at the rows of headstones bathed in golden sunlight. He hadn't been back here since that fateful night when he unearthed the secrets buried alongside his sister. Part of him feared returning, worried he might disturb her peace again. But today felt different. Today he wasn't coming as someone searching for answers. He was coming as someone who finally understood them. He walked slowly toward Lily's grave, his boots crunching softly against the frost-covered grass. A new plaque had been added, recently placed there by townsfolk who wanted to honor her memory. Its inscription read, "In loving memory of Lily Harper, whose bravery inspired us all." Ethan traced the words with his fingers, feeling a lump rise in his throat. For so long, he'd carried the weight of her loss alone. Now, it seemed, others were beginning to share that burden, and celebrate her courage too. As he knelt beside the headstone, Ethan pulled a small bundle from his coat pocket. Inside were wildflowers he'd picked earlier, bright yellows and deep purples, colors that reminded him of Lily's laugh. He arranged them carefully around the base of the stone, stepping back to admire how they brightened the space. "I did it, Lily," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tears pooling in his eyes. "I made sure they knew what you did. You didn't die for nothing." The wind rustled through the trees above him, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and earth. For a moment, Ethan swore he heard her giggle, the same carefree sound she used to make when they played hide-and-seek in these very woods. He smiled through his tears, letting the memory wash over him. She was still here, in her own way, watching over him and guiding him forward. Back in town, life was slowly starting to resemble something normal again, or at least a new kind of normal. The corruption scandal had forced Willow Creek to confront its darkest corners, but it had also sparked conversations about healing and growth. Community meetings became common, giving residents a chance to voice their frustrations, fears, and hopes for the future. Old grudges began to fade as people realized they weren't alone in their struggles. Even those implicated in the scandal faced consequences tempered with opportunities for redemption, though not everyone agreed this was fair. Ethan found himself playing an unexpected role in the town's recovery. Though he initially resisted becoming a public figure, his actions had earned him respect among many residents. They saw him not just as the man who exposed the truth, but as someone willing to sacrifice everything for justice. Invitations poured in, from speaking engagements to volunteer projects, but Ethan declined most of them. He didn't want recognition. He only wanted to ensure that Lily's story continued to inspire positive change. One project he couldn't refuse, however, was helping establish a memorial fund in Lily's name. The idea came from a group of local parents who wanted to create scholarships for children passionate about making a difference in their communities. It was simple yet meaningful, a way to keep Lily's spirit alive while empowering others to follow in her footsteps. Ethan threw himself into organizing fundraisers and outreach efforts, finding solace in the collective energy of people working toward a brighter future. Despite the progress, threats against Ethan hadn't disappeared entirely. Anonymous notes still appeared occasionally, warning him to stay quiet or face the consequences. but he no longer let them control him. Instead, he leaned on the growing network of allies who supported him, friends, neighbors, and even strangers, touched by his story. Together, they formed a protective shield around him, ensuring he never felt truly alone. Still, there were moments when the fear crept back in. Late at night, lying awake in bed, Ethan would replay every decision he'd made, wondering if he could have done things differently. Could he have protected Lily better? Could he have stopped the tragedy before it happened? These questions haunted him, but they also reminded him why he kept going. Guilt and grief would always be part of his journey, but so would love and purpose. On one such restless night, Ethan decided to visit the treehouse where Lily had spent so much of her childhood. Climbing up the rickety ladder brought back a flood of memories, their whispered secrets, their endless games, the way she'd always insisted on being the leader. Sitting on the weathered wooden floor, he looked out at the sprawling backyard below and imagined her running across it, her laughter echoing in the breeze. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to grieve fully, not just for the sister he lost, but for the innocence stolen from both of them. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I miss you, Lil, every single day." But grief wasn't the end. It was a bridge. As the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, Ethan climbed down from the treehouse with a renewed sense of clarity. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. And that was exactly what he intended to do. Life in Willow Creek wasn't perfect, and it likely never would be. Scars remained, reminders of wounds that might never fully heal. But amidst the pain, there was hope. Hope that truth could triumph over lies, hope that bravery could inspire change, and hope that even in the darkest moments light could emerge, if only we dared to look for it. Ethan returned to the cemetery one last time before winter set in, leaving behind a fresh bouquet of wildflowers. As he turned to leave, he paused, for a moment glancing back at Lily's grave. The plaque gleamed in the sunlight, its message etched not just in stone but in the hearts of everyone who knew her story. "Thank you, Lil," he murmured, smiling softly, "for everything." And with that, Ethan walked away, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.